basically a battlefield walk, except the only difference is I'm flying. And because it was an aerial combat that happened, I decided to actually fly, to rent an airplane and fly the route there where the Red Baron was actually shot down. So do you see this slide here now? History is not complete until we know all of the history.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, that's become a bit of a mantra of mine. I've read some books by David Olusoga, and I think they're absolutely terrific. And he makes a point that we have limited views of history and certain events, and there's a lot going on, and that's the beauty of it. So I'd like to kind of fill in some details. I'd like to sort of see it from a perspective that I'm used to. So I was mentioning this picture here, which I found on the history blog, and it's basically from an archaeological dig that was done about of a gravesite that was about 3,000 years old, and this young woman put the bracelets on, and I love this kind of thing because it comes a lot. It makes the history come alive, and there's now this you're in touch with people from 3,000 years ago. And this is the sort of thing that gets me excited about history, is when we can actually reach back and make it come alive. And it's something that I've endeavored to do. I consider myself a historian, but I consider myself an amateur historian. And so my procedures are hardly scientific, but I enjoy it. I love looking into detail. It just makes things more realistic for me. So this is what this is about. It's about Manfred von Richthofen, and I'm sure you all know about him. He's the leading ace of World War I, and it's been he's just a figure of fascination. And the question is always, why is Manfred von Richthofen so interesting? And the thing that I think certainly drew me in as a kid to the studying about the aces is simply because they're cool. They're heroes. For me, it was Bruce Lee. He was a cool guy, and for me, Manfred von Richthofen was a cool guy. So that drew me in the initial my initial interest as a child. But of course, as you grow older, you get more and more of a understanding of the history, and it's been a why is it that we're so interested in this guy? There's one guy. People write books about this one guy, and yet millions of people died in the war, and nobody gave them the credit. Nobody's figured out exactly how it is that they died, and they haven't done laser measurements and reenactments of these people, and it's tragic, but it is it's just, I don't know, just the way we're built. I guess we're fascinated with these heroes and want to dig into it. So I like to dig into the detail. I'm fascinated with all these aces, but I've grown my understanding of what the implications are about the war and the sacrifices that so many people have made. So I can't tell you I can put this all into I have a complete understanding. I'm far from that, but I'm still interested in the aces, but I am interested in the overall picture, and I am interested in hearing about the stories of the individual people. So just a little bit about myself. As I say, I've been doing this since I've been in grade 3. I've been interested in airplanes. I've become a glider pilot. I started that when I was about 17 years old, and I basically grew up on an airfield. So my perspective is from the air. I build models. That's something which is a hobby which I've been doing all my life, and it's just been a great thing for me. So the other thing, that a book that I had read called Knights of the Air, it started my interest in aviation, in World War I aviation specifically, but it also was illustrated by a wonderful artist, and I actually met him later on. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I'm drawing a blank, senior's moment here, but he was instrumental. That book was instrumental in getting me going as a designer. So I have a design firm. I'm a concept artist, and you can see one sample of the work I've done. So this one book in grade 3 triggered my interest in aviation. It triggered my interest in design and illustration. So, and that's what I do today. I have a company that specializes in design of theme parks and water parks and that sort of thing. So I've also become a member of the Great War Flying Museum. And down in the right-hand corner is a photograph that I took 2 days ago. Went up in the Sopwith 1.5 strutter that they have at the museum. And it was a replica SE5, 3/4 size, was flying formation. So I was in the back seat. So this is my first time I've actually had an experience of being in a World War I airplane. And boy, it was an eye opener. I thought I knew everything, you know, being a pilot and having read a zillion books. But boy, that experience of being inside that airplane was unbelievable. I put my hand up into the slipstream. I was strapped into the back seat looking backwards, but I stuck my hand up into the slipstream. I couldn't hold it out there. So the idea of what these guys went through was unbelievable. It was good to experience it. The noise, the vibration. This SE5 was weaving from left to right and going under the tail. And I thought, my gosh, if I had a machine gun, I don't know, I think I'd be Fokker fodder pretty quick. So anyways, it was a great experience. The Great War Flying Museum gives flights. You can book a flight, you can go up. Costs about $200, but you can go up and see what it's like firsthand. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about my my perception of this battle, this fight, from my perspective as a pilot. And this is a shot that was taken. I guess it's around the morning time when the fight actually happened around 10:30 in the morning. And this is a morning shot of the Somme Valley. I didn't take this one. I found this one online. But this is kind of what you see, you know, and it's from up there, it's misty. You know, you're really looking at, for the most part, the sky. The ground is misty. It's a long way down. And also the thing that happens in the air, as all of you have seen, if you looked out the window when you're taking a flight, is that the ground becomes flat. And the Somme Valley is actually, it's not that deep, but it's deep enough. You know, the air fight went right down on the deck. You know, they were flying along the river, and the sides of the ridge which was to the right, it's quite high, you know, relatively, especially when you're down low. But up high, the ground flattens out, and you really don't see that. Now, von Richthofen was no rookie. He had actually done a lot of ground strafing, so he knows what it's like to go from high up to down low, and what that experience is like. But for most of a flight, this is what you're seeing. The world, you're detached from the world. And so, yes, there is Archie, and you know there were anti-aircraft explosions, but the ground is way down there, and your real threat is up high. So I need to emphasize that, because to understand that, you know, we have all sorts of words and written about, you know, how the gunners were firing at him, how Brown was firing at him, but it's good to see what he was actually seeing himself, and it was not unlike this. So the ground was way down there. Also, as a glider pilot, I've had some fabulous experiences. What is important to me as a pilot, as a glider pilot, is what's in the air with you. And I'm looking looking at the clouds. I'm looking at probably sources for possible thermals. I'm looking at my instruments. But I've been in gaggles of gliders before, 12, 14 gliders, and they're all jockeying around, trying to get the best position for the thermal. So the right-hand picture, this is common. I'm watching the guy in front of me. In this case, this picture was taken from a third person who's actually behind these two. So you can actually see them go up and down in the thermal, and you're trying to keep position. One thing that's different about being flying a glider in a gaggle like this is that nobody's trying to kill you. So but still, these are threats to me, but they're also indicators of who's going up and who's going down, where the thermal is. but there's still threats. I don't want to have a mid-air collision. So I'm very, very aware of this. I'm not paying attention to the ground at all. I'm looking at these other aircraft that are circling around with me. And it's funny too, when you're in a thermal and you're strapped in and you're climbing, you want to climb the other guy. You want to find the lift and get higher faster than everybody else. So it triggers the competitive urge in you. And I can imagine, I can just imagine what it must be like in a dogfight where you want to get that behind that other guy. And so these are young men who are flying here. So, and this sense of you want to survive, you don't want to fly into anybody or have somebody fly into you. But on the other hand, you're competing very aggressively. So when you're in a thermal like this, or when you come out, it's exhilarating and you're really keyed up. And when you get out, you go, phew, wow, glad that's over. But it's a real thrill. So I can only take that experience with me about what it must have been like. And this is important because it sort of sets the stage. So two things, I think that you're up high. Von Richthofen and the fight that he was in, they're up high, not paying that much attention to the ground. You're also looking at the threats that all around you, and these are your own people and the people who are trying to kill you, and then the people who he wanted to kill. So it's a different kind of thing that he was looking for. The people say, well, why did he do what he did? Why did he break his rules and drop down? Well, it's a different perspective. It was a dumb thing to do and it got him killed. He went down low. He broke his rule. He went down low and chased somebody behind the lines. But you have a different perspective than what you have on the ground, and I want to emphasize that. So there's, as I say, there's certain things that were similar that I have as a pilot, but as a civil pilot, I'm fortunate that I don't have the thing where people are trying to kill me. So this is a bit of a silly map, but this is kind of basically where I went. On the left-hand side is Amiens, and there's the Somme River, which is very, very distinctive. So the feature through there. And again, like when you're up high, you see, yes, they would have seen the scar of the front lines going through, but there's a lot of farmland, and it's very beautiful. And you see the sky. So it's a different perspective than what you'd have on the ground. This is a close-up map. I believe it's a map that was done fairly, maybe, after the war, but it shows on the left-hand side, Amiens, here's the Somme River, which really isn't a river. It's really a series of marshes that runs through. And through here is the front lines, and they were actually running right through a little town called Sally-le-Sec at that period of time. This is not a great, sorry, it's a little bit fuzzy, but this is a contour map, and it shows the Somme Valley at this point. Here's the Amiens over here. The river kind of runs through, and there's a series of this one big ridge here, but there's a series of cutaways as well. The front lines ran, I believe it was right through here, this black line, and this is the high ground. So there's Sally-le-Sec there. And so you can see that there's, I guess these are 1 meter increments here. The Australian gunners, field artillery, there was a bunch of them stationed here behind the ridge, and they were firing over top of the ridge. So if you were on the German side, you couldn't see these batteries that were hidden here. And so the Australians were largely within this area here. And again, forgive me, I'm not a historian of any sort. There's people with a lot of knowledge about what was actually going on the ground. So I'm beginning to get that now. But the front lines, here's Amiens, here's Sally-le-Sec, and the front lines that were in April of 1918 was this green line. And these other lines, the gold one, the green one, the pink line, they show the offensive which happened in 1918. But the green line is where it was on that particular day. Again, another sort of Google map. It's a great vacation. I hope I'm sure many of you actually visited this site. There is a ton of stuff to see. and the Australian memorials, and you can see some of these. There's not a lot to see around around the areas of interest for me is for the Red Baron, but certainly there's tons of stuff to see in the area. So this is gives you a bit of an idea of where we're talking. We've zoomed in here. I've got a number of maps to show you, but here's essentially the essential parts that I'm interested in it for his last flight. The front line was running approximately here through Sally-le-Sec on that day. Von Richthofen took off from an airfield here at a place called Cappy, and then flew here. Big dogfight around Sally-le-Sec, Sally-Lorette. There was a big swirling dogfight, and then he crashed here. Another thing that I want to emphasize is that my flight that I took, it was over like in an instant. From my calculations, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's about 13 kilometers, 8 miles from where he took off, flew along the Somme River with his squadron, and that takes about 6 minutes. And then there was a dogfight, which I don't know how long that lasted, let's say 10 minutes. And then the actual combat itself was no more than 15 minutes long. So within a half an hour, this whole thing happened. It was over in an instant. And there's a wonderful piece on if you can get Netflix, there's Discovery Channel had done a show where they use lasers, and they did a time study and all that. It's a great one to watch. I checked it out again last night. So definitely worth watching. The other important thing that we need to know is that the prevailing winds were coming from east to west. Usually they come from west to east or from the northwest. On that day, they were coming from the east. And so the time that he took to fly from his home airfield in Cappy to this battle area, you're blown with the wind. You're like a fish in an aquarium. You pick that aquarium up, you're going to move with it. So a pilot always has to be aware of drift and how the wind is actually carrying you along. So I'm sure very, very aware of it. But again, they said that he was maybe focused on the dogfight and chased May across the enemy lines. Usually the Germans didn't cross that much. They stayed on their side of the lines, and the Allies had to go after them. But he made the mistake of crossing the lines, and of course the wind was drifting as well. So your ground speed was increased, not by it wasn't high winds, but still it was enough that you have to watch your drift. And if you're concentrating on dogfight, you're not concentrating that much on your drift. And also I want to emphasize, like, it was misty, that shot that I'd shown you, that's it's not easy to really pick out ground features. So I think it would be easy for him to cross over the lines and not being fully aware of it. You can dispute that, and you're probably right, but I think it's a factor. So this is roughly, I did this from a composite from a number of studies, that this is the path that, oh, sorry, I just want to go back one. Roy Brown and his squadron came from up here, northwest of here. They flew down, had the big dogfight, and then away they went. So, and then of course there were Australians' positions were all along the ridge. So this is approximately, my idea of what happened. Von Richthofen and his crew came from this side. May and Brown actually had come up from the south. I guess they'd been swirling around, but the dogfight happened over at Sally-le-Sec, and then the chase happened. So Von Richthofen chased May along the valley, and then I think they came up to the ridge and they pulled up. Sorry, May is the yellow line here. So they chased at low level and then popped up and over the ridge. I think I don't have this quite right. I just have it came around and crashed, but there was a bit of a fishhook. He came down and then crashed back the other way. So he did a bit of an S curve from what we understand. So again, there was back here, this is the backside of the ridge. This is where there was anti-aircraft guys. So Buoy and Evans were back here with anti-aircraft guns. I think they had post-mounted Lewis guns. Popkin was here with a Vickers gun. So Popkin had a pop at him as he was coming here, but probably missed, because if they examined his body and they found that the bullet had come from lower right and exited upper left, which makes it difficult to believe that the shot was actually from Brown in the air. It's more likely that it was actually came from the ground. Sorry to say, that seems to be the overwhelming evidence that I can see. So Popkin didn't get him on this point, but when he did come back, he had a chance to get him from. He came around and got him from right and below. The other one who was likely to have gotten was Evans, because he was flying away from him and he was in the right position. So he came around and crashed in this area here, and very close to a building, a set of buildings called the Brickworks. So my flight was actually down the river valley and to follow this route. So and you can see even from this that it's really it's not what you call like a river. It's more like, it's very low, very marshy, ponds everywhere, and they actually had to cut a canal through here in order for boats to go through. So the boats don't actually go on the river; they go on the canal. So and if you go in to do some research, there's all sorts of diagrams of positions and things like that. I'm really not going to get into that right now, because it's been covered. There's tons of books about it, tons of documentaries about it. So look into it. And there's some things which are even contradictory. Like this is a map that done by somebody who was, I think, supposedly there or soon after, and they didn't fly that straight. I think you got to just kind of poke through and see what the information is and kind of draw your own conclusions. But I am of the conclusion that the shot was from the ground that got him. And I may be wrong, but you look at when Brown shot at him around here, and then he flew on chasing May further. So if Brown had gotten the kill shot here, it was a massive wound, and yeah, boy, he would have been entering this death very quickly, but he didn't. He kept going. So if anything, Brown took a shot at him and then made him aware of what was happening, but he still continued to chase. And then one of these Brown gunners, I think, got him. Is everybody reeling from that? I'm sorry if you are. So again, go online, tons of information about this. So this is a shot which is taken from the Australian lines, and it's dropping down to the right into the Somme Valley. And you can see that what they call a ridge isn't what we think of a ridge. You gotta, like Saving Private Ryan, you got to go up this cliffside. It's the ridges are very, very gentle, very, 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 very low, but still you can see that a machine gunner up on the high ground can certainly fire down and see the enemy down below. So this is a case where the Australian positions are dug in on one of the slopes that are going down there. And what's also interesting is that back then I don't see any trees here. This is pretty. And I don't think they've been bombarded. I think they just simply cut them all down. Now it's grown over and there's trees everywhere. So so it doesn't look like it did look like back then. So that's one thing. You've got to use your imagination. This is I believe Sally Lasek, nestled into one of the little ridges in there. I believe, I might have that wrong though. This is a view which is taken back. This is actually what's called Moreland Court Ridge. So we're looking more or less northeast here. So the flight would have come along behind that dark line of trees and then up and over the ridge. If you look closely, you can actually see the smokestack from the brickworks. So this is kind of looking back. This is another view of Moreland Court Ridge. And back behind here is the brickwork. So they actually flew from right to left, climbed up and over this ridge, and then came under fire from the Australians on the backside of the ridge, and then crashed back here. What's interesting is that a lot of these features are still there today, and you can see them. There's another closer shot of Morlancourt Ridge. So this building is a postcard, and I believe it's, wait a minute, sorry. Remember this right here. So we're back here, and then this is what it looks like today. So these features here are still there, and it's kind of neat. And you can see the coverage of it is different, but nothing much has really changed that much. Here's a shot that I found, and this is the Australian positions. This is the Somme. Here's the canal. Can everybody, hopefully everybody can see that okay. There's the canal. The front lines, I've roughly put them in here. So that's Sally Lesec nestled back in here. Now, obviously, the Germans aren't going to advance along here unless they got a bunch of boats. So the trench is pretty well end at this point where the land drops off. But this is the kind of view that the Australians who were firing at them would have had. And I go to Google Earth. There's Sally Lesec. There's the canal, and I see this little wiggle right here. I think that's this little wiggle right here. So it's very marshy through here. And this photograph, I believe, was taken right about in here somewhere. So that dogfight, that chase that von Richthofen they came right past here, must come right past these positions at low level. You can see that you're still looking down, but that's about where I think it actually happened. Here's another view from Google Earth. This is what it looks like today. This is that Australian position, which is pretty close. Here it is from almost ground level in Google Earth, and the features match up pretty well if you ask me. Here's the edge of the Somme River, and here the little wiggle in it, and that little wiggle is still there. That little island that's there, well, there it is there. There's the canal, there's the canal. There's the slope, there's the slope. There's Sally Lesec. So there you go. I think it's all there. You know, you can probably walk right to this very spot. I think Glenn would get gas for that kind of experience of seeing what it was like. Much more heavily treed today than it was back then, and obviously it was in the spring as well. So so the leaves weren't quite coming back. So let's get on to my flight. I know where I wanted to go. There's an airport right here in Amiens, and it's an old airfield. I think it may have been there during the war. It was certainly there during World War II. I was asking what happened with the Germans here, and yes, they were. They had some Luftwaffe aircraft based there. So I had a choice of either this airport here or this airport here. So I chose this one for no particular reason, just because it was basically easy to get to. And I got there, and I hardly speak a word of French. So I just took it in high school. And but I'm funny, I managed to make myself understood, and they say, oh, they knew what I wanted, because I think other people have shown up for this very same thing. So basically, we're going to fly from this airport and then fly over to this area here, and then come back along the Somme, and then circle around the crash site, which is roughly here. The brickworks are in here. So I wanted to see what that was like, see how long it took, that sort of thing. So here we go. We're going to start the flight, and if you see that documentary by Discovery, it's on YouTube actually, you'll see that this is the airport they took off from to do these studies for lasers. The very airplane that's in the documentary, I flew that type, or sorry, I beg your pardon, I flew in. So they have it's a glider club that's there. So I look very familiar with these beautiful gliders, and they had some warbirds there. They had a Stearman, so it's pretty cool, neat place. And we flew in an aircraft called a Robin, and you can just see one back over here. I guess it's like a Piper Cherokee. It's got fabric wings, and it's got the outer sections of the wings have a bit of dihedral on them, so it has a bit of a look of a Stuka to it. So I flew with this fella, and didn't speak a word of English, but he was an aerobatic pilot. He had a leather jacket, so I figured he knows what he was doing. So we hopped in, and away we went. And I had with me a piece of the Red Baron's airplane. So I was given that from a buddy named Larry Watson of London, And he said, you're a good guy here. He had a piece of bigger piece of fabric, and this was hanging off. So he gave me this piece. So I've reunited the Red Baron's airplane. Doesn't that bring tears to your eyes? So I thought that was kind of goofy, but it was kind of fun. And my wife, of course, who flew with us in the back seat. She has no fear. She was actually, I took her up for a flight in the glider and proposed to her afterwards, once we get on the ground, and she said yes. So there you go. So she was a good sport, and we went. She was in the back seat. So here we go. Now I was just banging away pictures, and I didn't really think of taking them in a sequence. So these might be a little bit out of sequence, but forgive me. But this will give you an idea of what it is we're looking at. So you notice that it looks, the picture on the right, it looks flat, like it doesn't, you don't see any contours from up here. But you saw the picture of that from the Australian positions. It really is quite, the valley is lower than you think. So this is a wartime picture. Here's the canal, and the town Sally Lorette is here, and it's either appears, I guess, here somewhere. It just bombed the crap out of it, so there wasn't much left. So, but basically, you can see these features are still there today. This is an aerial view of Sally Lorette, where the dogfight happened right over top of here. This is a series of views of just basically flying along the canal towards the site. And you really got to use your imagination to think this is ground zero. This is the front lines. This was mud, but it's all grown up. It's all very lovely. You really got to use your imagination. So so you can see that we're getting lower here. The pilot was a good sport. Of course he was a us keeping an eye on pilots, but we were flying a little bit lower than maybe what we should have, but we certainly weren't on the deck. I think at this point, Von Richthofen and May were right down on the water, and they had to sort of fly up and over things, and we were still quite high. You can see our shadow there, and we're coming towards the end of it, where we're actually coming towards Morlingcourt Ridge. So here we've actually pulled up and over the ridge. We were actually getting, pretty much below the top of the ridge, and we were we pulled up and over the ridge. Now May had just barely skimmed the top, so we were a few hundred feet well above the ridge. So don't worry, it was safe, relatively speaking. This is actually the crash site now, so we're going to start to circle around the crash site. Here's the brickworks, and this is where he crashed in this field. So Von Richthofen actually flew a route very similar to this. We're going up and over the ridge. To the left, that you don't see in the photograph, is where Bui and Evans were firing at him. So he flew around and circled and crashed, or came back and then crashed here. So right now we'd probably be pretty close to the firing zone of Frederick Popkin, who was down to our right. So here's some shots as we're starting to circle the site, and you can see the Bray Corby Road. Here's the brickworks, and this is a field that he crashed in. So this approximately would be heading right towards Bui and Evans, who would be firing at him. And this is pretty well the position, where he would be in as he passed over those two gunners and was hit, and then would have come back, flown around here, and then crashed here. So we flew over the brickworks and circled around just to get a feeling for it. And it was pretty well in this field right here that the aircraft came down. So we would have come from upper right, sorry, I beg your pardon, maybe from the left, and then crashed into here. There was a bit of a mound in the field somewhere, but that's the crash site right there. And then once we got down, I drove back to the actual site, and these are the brickworks, and this is the field which he was found in. and they had the a memorial, small memorial there, and to show exactly where the site. Not much of a memorial, but that's what's left. The in town, this is a church that May and von Richthofen, they just barely made it over this thing. They skimmed over this. So this is in the village, which is right near the crash site. We also drove back. It was kind of neat. We're driving around and said, "Hey, that's the church." So so that church is famous. They almost hit that belfry there. Then we drove over to Cappy, and we can see the this was his headquarters. The house is empty. I thought it'd be a great bed and breakfast. But across the street, back behind us, is the airfield where the aircraft actually took off from. So we did a little bit of a mini tour. And then in the area, we went up to Vimy Ridge, and we also went to the Thiepval Memorial and the Museum of the Great War, which is a terrific museum. So there's tons of stuff to see if you get into the if you get a chance to go over there and tour around. So I guess that's what this is all about. This was my impressions. I didn't answer anything, as far as who killed him, but I do have now a much better sense. Just like if you walk the battlefield, you know what the ground feels like. You know how far it is from here to there. So I as a pilot now, I have a better sense of what happened, in that really, really short time, and what they were dealing with. So there you go. That's the talk. As I mentioned, I'm a member of the Great War Flying Museum. Would love to meet more people, get a stronger connection with you folks in this group, and because I think we have a lot to share. Okay, so that's the end of the talk, and I'll be happy to take any questions. So.
Garfield, first and foremost, thank you very much. And guess we accept questions now. Sarge had a clever one there a second ago.
I just found something in my library there.
Mm-hmm.
That might be the book that you're talking about, Nights in the Air, 1958.
Yes.
Not sure where I found it, but
yeah, great. And sorry, the artist, his name is
William Wheeler.
William Wheeler. Yeah, he just passed away recently, and I got a chance to meet him, and he autographed my book for me. But I used to love those little pictures that were in there, and I used to trace them and draw them, and boy, was that inspirational for me.
Garfield, you had a piece of the plane you showed at one point there. Could you be a little clearer on that? You actually had a piece of Richthofen's plane with you?
Yeah, there are actually little bits of fabric floating around somewhere in museums. One's actually in downtown Toronto in the Royal Canadian Military Institute, and they come up on auction occasionally. Pieces that might be some bigger, some smaller. So my buddy Larry, who's a fellow modeler in London, he had just bought a piece in auction. It was about 4 inches by 4 inches, 3 by 3, whatever, and had a little piece hanging off the side. And he said, "Garfield, you're a great guy. Here, take it." So I have this little treasure now that I have. So it's
you should give it to me, Garfield.
What's that?
I think you should give it to me.
I should give it to you? Okay. Honestly, it's the size of a fingernail clipping, and but it's a bit of history, and I'm actually starting the process of I want to get it chemically analyzed, because I want to find out what's the base of that paint, because I understand that they could have used iron oxide as a base, which would have made the red a little bit more brown. I worry about stupid little things like that. And if it was made from another base chemical, it would have been a little brighter red. So anyways, it is an opportunity. I can get a chemical analysis done on that paint. So there you go.
What type of plane is that on the slide that's on the screen right now?
Let's see here. This one here?
Yes.
That is a Sopwith 1.5 strutter. It's an odd name, but the 1.5 comes from the W-shaped cabane struts here. And it was actually a very, one of Sopwith's first creations. It was a 2-seater, and they've actually got a replica flying at the Great War Flying Museum. And you can get this is one I just flew a couple days ago. flew in, and boy, it was pretty neat. So yeah, it's heavy airplane, big, stable, heavy airplane, and it was used for reconnaissance, and it was used. They fared over the back seat, and they used it as a bomber. They had a fighter version, which actually had the two-seater. So it was, yeah, it was a neat airplane. Didn't last that long, because it was pretty old, obsolete by 1917. But it's alive and well at our in Brampton.
Oh, great.
Garfield, did you follow any of the, did you like visit his initial burial site and then perhaps go to Freecourt after? And I
No.
wonder if you, oh, okay.
No, I didn't go to the Britangles, right? The Britangle Cemetery.
Right.
Yeah, there was
Yeah.
just so much I can drag my wife to. I mean, she was, she gets a gold medal for, she's a great sport, for, great. She's a great sport. So she followed me around, and I didn't want to push it. but what was neat, we went back to Cappy, and saw this mansion where he was stationed for the last flight. And we looked through the gate, and it was empty. Like, I thought, wow, I'm gonna buy this place and turn it into a B&B.
Any questions for our guest? It's a brilliant topic, Garfield. Again, I'm just going to show this book. This is a fun book if you're on the Western Front to in the footsteps of the Red Baron. It's a lot of fun. There's so many great publications to fuel our interest.
I had that book with me, Glenn, when I went there, and actually could find exactly. They said park here, and it's really handy. So, has anybody of our crew actually, of this group, have they actually been there themselves?
Quite a few of us have been to the site.
To the crash site, yeah. Okay.
And Glenn Warner was quite active. He was in Freecourt, the German cemetery, trying to find the burial site when he was moved there. He's not there anymore, but he spent some time trying to putting the pieces of the puzzle there. Right.
Yeah, if you want to do the same flight, you can do it. They don't advertise it. It was I wrote it. I don't speak French, so I wasn't able to email back and forth the book. So I just basically showed up. So, but they will do it, but they don't advertise it. So, so you can go to that airfield, and if you speak French, all the better. You can go and book the airplane yourself. But they'll know what you're talking about, what you want to see. So,
Garfield, I was going to Dave Fuller here. I was going to mention that you were talking about how fascinated you were early about the aces and how exciting it was. I went through the same thing, and I've read a lot about the air war as well. And I think the reason we all know so much about it and think of them as heroes is because there was a conscious effort by the opposing sides to use the flying guys as propaganda instruments. It was cleaner, it was more heroic, it wasn't as grimy and gritty as the ground war. And they did a lot of stuff. They did a lot of stuff to gild the lily with these guys.
oh yeah,
Von Richthofen was set up for easy kills a lot. And then there's the whole controversy over Bishop and what he actually did or didn't do. And I believe he did all he said he did, because I'm a Bishop fan, but there are those who question some of his claims. It was heavily laced with propaganda, and that stuff lingers, and we picked it up as kids because there were books and comics and movies and stuff. So yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I grew up with the Blue Max and the Dam Busters and Reach for the Sky, and it's cool. Like I showed Bruce Lee, but that's what got me into it. And it's you look for role models and heroes, and I had heroes like Bobby Bond and Dave Keon, and you're just young, that sort of gets into that. And that's something we should remember too. There are ways of, like, we are an older bunch, and when you think, we were probably all very young when we got in there. It was much more history minded generation, I think.
Yep.
I think certainly more air-minded back then, but there are these video games that they have now. Kids are coming into our area of interest through video games.
Yeah.
And they know a lot of technical stuff. It's shocking how much they know.
Well, they treat it like a shooter game, and they know specs of guns and all kinds of stuff. The first hero of my Air Force interest was this guy over my shoulder here. That's my father standing beside his Wellington trainer in
Oh, cool.
Wellsburn, Mountford in England. He was a tail gunner.
Right. Yeah, and our kids, the closest I ever got to war was this argument. I had a guy over a parking spot in a parking lot. So, I'm lucky, so kids don't have that, but still, don't look at it as a bad thing. The video games and all that, it may be just as I got in there by, thinking it was cool. I guess I still have that. I was thought it was cool when I was flying yesterday. But kids are getting into it, and maybe it's up to us to try to find that way of making the connection to what we're interested in and what they're interested in.
Hey, Garfield, question that, because it's great to study the individual and some of the fantastic, I guess, achievements they made. I also am interested in the use of air power as a kind of a transformative strategy in the latter days of the Great War, and whether it be from bombers or from an offensive weapon along trench lines and stuff like that. Do you also get into just studying that part of just because it was a mind change versus, say, from 1914 all the way up to 1918 in terms of how air power is used within the offensive, like Amiens and all throughout the last 100 days?
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in it. As I say, I emphasize I'm a historian, but an amateur, capital A amateur. So when I get into something, I read about something else, and I have the kind of shotgun effect. But yeah, it certainly is. In reading more and more about the two-seater crews as opposed to the aces, those are the Wayne Gretzky's of their days. But that I just read a book about by Berthold, Rudolf Berthold, and he flew. I have a shot of that Tauba. It looks like a bird. Very early in the war, and he was actually, they were bombarding the coast. Towns like Dunkirk. So they had actually discovered the usefulness of aerial reconnaissance, like right out of the gate. And of course, as the war went on, things became more systematized, and they had targets and all that. And but it was, I thought it was more of a development that was later on, but it was really, really early on that use for the Army was that they were used for the Army. So I don't know. Does that answer
it's just more of just opening up to different areas of study that may be of interest to anyone on the in the group. So
yeah, it's interesting too that I just finished a book about some DH-4 pilot, and it was two-seater, and they'd go on bombing missions, and I didn't realize there was that many bombing missions that were, they do it just like in World War II. They found that they had the target, they had the maps, they had to time it, the long distance, the whole bit. Like they were, they were talking about the accuracy or inaccuracy of aerial bombardment. So the problems that they had at the beginning of World War II, they had in World War I, and they were having the same successes and the same failures, and seems like the same failure rates in World War I that they were having in early World War II. So it was interesting, that whole period between the wars was kind of lost, that they didn't learn anything about that whole thing. So
Benjamin, did you have a question?
Yes, Garfield, it's Benjamin here.
hey Ben,
You've probably seen this magazine. I
wait a
picked it up at the library.
Here, let me see where you are here. I got to find you. Are you holding something up?
It's the Beaver magazine from a couple years ago.
Okay,
it has an article about the Red Baron.
okay. Oh, there you are, up in there. Okay. Right, yes, yes, I have that.
It's and you know, your talk today could perhaps maybe be a follow-on to this article, because you have the aerial flights and the plaque and that, and then people could go in and visit it. Just an idea.
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's a super article. And yeah, I encourage you to go on, go to YouTube and look at some of the videos that are on there. There's tons of research that's been done already. Like they've studied this combat to death, with pictures and measurements and everything else. It's but yeah, that certainly is a good one.
This is the Beaver magazine, so it's sort of a Canadian magazine, right? They've
Yeah.
renamed it Canada's History, right?
Yeah, that was a special that they put out, right?
Well, no, it's just one article of many
Right.
in
What's
the
the year of that issue, Benjamin?
2018, April and May. And they have them in the libraries,
Okay.
but
I was just
unfortunately,
gonna make a, sorry.
there's not a great demand for them, so they're actually throwing them out. And
No.
that's how I got this one, because nobody's taking them out anymore.
I was just going to make a comment about the something that with regards to the who was credited with the victory, or who should be rightfully credited with the victory. You meet people through chat rooms and whatnot who insist that the Aussies should be given credit for the kill. And my experience is there aren't a lot of people fighting for our side of history. In the Thiepval Museum there, they've just opened up the new museum there, and they have all the aces. They have Bishop and Richthofen and all the French pilots, German pilots, and they all the little placards with each pilot say they had so many victories. When you get to Bishop's, it says that he claimed so many victories, which made me angry to the point that I talked to the people at the museum about it. But it just seems that everyone you talk to now, it's just become accepted that the Aussies did it. Now, maybe they did. I mean, it's been studied extensively, but I just, from my point of view, it's nice when there's someone there to fight for our perspective on the Western Front. Now there's very few people there to fight for our history. And Villers-Bretonneux, for example, was Aussies paid a great victory there, but it's also Canada there, and we're basically ignored there. So that's just my point, that
Right.
Bishop claimed the victories, but everyone else was credited with the victories, and it just bothers me that no one is sticking up for. Or in the case Roy Brown, nobody is really sticking up for Roy Brown, and he's become a bit of a footnote now that this new examination of the flight, the final flight.
Right. Yeah. And Glenn, we I think you can tell, I'm swayed a little bit more to the argument that came from the ground. Just having looked at it, it's but that being said, we can't, you have to conclude what you want. And you're right about the rewriting history. I understand that, like Bishop, for example, they said he didn't do all this. Well, a lot of the records were destroyed because they needed the paper. During World War II, they destroyed the combat records, and they said they have all the evidence. Well, they don't have all the evidence. They haven't. A lot of it's gone. So,
well, and Garfield, with Bishop, it was also that he did some of these famous exploits by himself, and so he couldn't get confirmation. I mean, that the one that got him the VC, did he get a VC? Yeah. But anyway, the one that got him the notoriety was the solo mission over the German airfield. Well, did he or didn't he?
well, yeah,
I'm a complete Bishop fan, and I believe it. But
I do too. And they say, well, there was no German records to verify it. But I don't know. Apparently, all those records, like we're talking like 1917. So what happened? Like we had another war in between where everything, we bombed the crap out of everywhere, and there's a lot of stuff was burnt to cinder. So of course, there's not going to be complete records on World War I because of World War II went through.
And they weren't fans of keeping records of a war they lost either.
But I also believe that, you know, if Bishop doesn't have a lot of independent confirmation, then, you know, it's his word. And, you know, do you believe everything he said, or, you know, do you rely on independent confirmation? And I think that's the big thing with a lot of the aces, is that they do have, you know, other pilots confirming their kills. Where with Bishop, there's a lot that wasn't, because he was by himself so much of the time.
Well, you know, again, just my perspective as a pilot, you know, that well, two things. First of all, there was a lot of overclaiming by both sides. You can be in a swirling dogfight and you take a good shot at somebody, but then somebody else takes a good shot at the same airplane, and you're accurate, you know. So there are multiple claims on things. So the other thing is, when you're way up high, and I fly in a zone of about, you know, from 5,000 feet, 6,000 feet, you know, max, you know, in there. That's typical Southern Ontario kind of cloud base for soaring. But they're up at like 12, 15, 20,000 feet. And if you look down, you can hardly see houses. Certainly you can't. If you were to watch an airplane go down all that way, you're going to be dead. I mean, you can't watch it. You can't even see an airplane when it hits the ground from high altitude. So, you know, confirmation, great. You know, you can take them all with a grain of, you know, with a bit of skepticism.
And I think it's also a case of, you know, if I wound the aircraft and you kill the aircraft, who's responsible? Who gets the credit?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, because you were in a position to finish him off, but I started. So,
yeah,
you know, how do you argue with that?
There's that famous scene in the Battle of Britain movie where a pilot comes in all excited and says he got the Jerry. He says, "Right, lad, a third of a kill. You're the third one to say they got him."
Right.
The other problem too with confirmation, it's the same thing with snipers during the war. If you're operating alone and you snipe somebody, who's going to do confirmation? And flying an airplane in the World War I is very much like that. It's a singular event, a personal event, and who's going to be there to make that confirmation? It's really a problem that can't be overcome.
Yeah, and it's you know, I think that it shows the problem with hero worship. You know, when we really get into these aces, great, fascinating stuff, but you can't be, you know, that's not the entire history. It's only part of the history. And there was a lot of shots fired by pilots who weren't aces, and you know, that's why I don't get too upset about, you know, the Australian claims of having shot down von Richthofen, because, well, you know, like it's likely, and you know, there were a lot of bullets fired in the air that day from the ground, a lot more than from the air, and so, you know, we just don't hear about those stories of the real people that were involved. You know, we hear all the attention is on the aces, you know, and you know, we gotta, you know, as you know, that first thing, you know, you gotta look at all the history, that expression from that I had at the beginning, you know, the history is not complete, you know, all of the history. So, you know, there's a lot of stories of smaller people, common pilots who did things, and you just don't hear about that much.
The other thing I think about, Garfield, is the whole point of aircraft was to aid the artillery. Artillery ruled the war. It was the single most decisive factor in the war, and the planes were there to support the artillery. Well, then you had to shoot down these planes supporting the artillery. That's why fighters were created. But right, if that's their main mission, how did they wind up fighting each other so much? And what was the point of that? It was, you know, it's sort of getting off the point of flying, but I guess you had to. It was a fight for air supremacy.
Yeah, it was. I mean, if I shoot down a German fighter, that German fighter isn't going to shoot down one of our two-seaters. So hence, you had to be fighters. They were a threat to the artillery, so you had to sort of neutralize that threat.
Yeah, but the way the propaganda worked is that they made these guys out to be knights of the air, jousting and glorious combat and all that. And no, they had a job to do.
Yeah.
And this was just a thing they had to do to get through to do their job. So it's kind of part of it's lost in all of the hero worship.
Yeah, for sure. And boy, I'd encourage you to go to the Great War Flying Museum and take a flight in the Sopwith 1.5 strutter in the back seat. And you're gonna like when I go, okay, I'm an old geezer. I wasn't not 18 years old, but when I got down, it was like, wow, okay, let me sit down and have a cup of tea here. Well, those guys would, and I was up for about half an hour. I was just sitting there, kind of like taking pictures with my cell phone. Those guys were up and they were like looking around and standing up in this airstream, which was really, really powerful. When you get the prop wash hitting you in an open cockpit airplane, man, it's murder. So, and to think that they got down, then they went up again, and then again, like 2, 3, 4 times in a day, and then they do it again the next day, and the next day, and the next day. Like, there's no glamour in that. There's no knighthood in that. Like, it was tiring, and it's just exhausting. I can't believe how exhausting it was, even just for me, like for that one stupid little flight. So yeah, it wasn't as glamorous.
And yet that wasn't appreciated because everybody thought it was glamorous, that they would be home in time for tea and all that kind of stuff. But I did research on one of my guys, the group that I research, and he it didn't say so much in his records, but he was washed out basically with PTSD.
Yep.
And he wound up in a convalescent home, and they restricted his light flying duties, and then he finally wound up back in Canada in a training role, which became the regular routine in the Second War. But they didn't understand the stress of this glamorous pursuit.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was thinking of as you were talking was the early types, they had the smell, that castor oil that they used to lubricate the engines, and apparently that made quite a sickening smell as they were up there.
Yeah, I can tell you from firsthand experience. I smelled the exhaust fumes for the entire flight I was up in yesterday, and it was wasn't pleasant. The what was I going to say? Oh, at one time, and also the fear. I mean, we talk about Knights of the Air and they're brave and all that. Well, I was flying in a metal glider one time, and it's circling around, and I heard this bang in the back somewhere. I don't know what it was, and it scared the crap out of me.
A bird?
I don't know what it was. You hear about things getting blown up in these thermals. Could have been a bird. I don't know. So I kind of tested the controls, making sure, carefully, and then I landed and looked back. There was nothing, no damage, but it was terrifying experience because I didn't have a parachute, and so when these guys have explosions going around them and bullets firing around, and man, these are young guys, PTSD. No kidding. I mean, I don't know how you could have gotten away without some kind of emotional happening.
I was going to mention, by the way, Garfield has become a member of our group, so we have a great resource. That's another addition to our collection of great resources. So we're thrilled to have you as a member, Garfield.
Hey, yeah, great. Yeah, it's glad to be here. Hey, by the way, I'm plotting a scheme. There's I don't know how familiar everybody is with the aces in the air and all that, but there's a fellow named Andrew McKeever, who has always claimed to be the highest ranking 2-seater ace for the Allies. Okay, was not. There's actually a guy named Alfred Atke.
We just had an article on McKeever in a recent issue of the Maple Leaf.
Yeah, Atke had I believe it was 38, McKeever at 31. Now I'm just starting research about Alfred Atke, and if anybody can help, great. Look, just Google him and you'll see that he actually outranks him. And I had found a story. I should have kept it. I don't know where I found it, but apparently he died on Carlton Avenue, right in front of Maple Leaf Gardens, a homeless alcoholic right on the street. And he's cited, but has no fame whatsoever. He's got a gravesite in Mississauga, a little stone that has his name. So I'm hatching a scheme right now to do a flyover with the Great War Flying Museum with our Sopwith 1.5 strutter, and do a little formation flight over the gravesite, and because it's just south of Brampton in Mississauga. So Alfred Atke, look him up. I'm
I'd
looking.
love to do that. Yeah. Did he fly the F2B as well?
Yes, he flew that. Yeah, I think he flew. Started with the DH4, and then went to the. But he had this epic flight, this epic fight, 2 against 20. It was, but the knowledge of him has kind of disappeared. And I'm collecting information about him. I'd like to write a book about him, but I certainly want to bring that up. And you know, if I can keep in touch with you guys, if you're interested in maybe providing a ground contingent at the gravesite on Memorial Day, on Remembrance Day, and we'll do an overflight with the smoke and the whole bit. And you know, I just think it's important that we recognize this fellow who's really the top ranking 2C.
Well, there's a good article for the Maple Leaf, Garfield. We should get going on that.
Do you know the
do you
gravestone?
spell
What
his
is the cemetery that he's buried in?
Sorry, I don't have the information for it right at my fingertips, but it's in Mississauga. So somebody's actually taken a picture. You can go, again, Google them and you
Find a
can,
grave might
Yeah.
give it. Yeah.
Maybe that one, yeah.
How do you
yeah,
spell his
I'll
name?
find out all the
Spring Creek
coordinates.
Cemetery.
How do you spell his name?
Alfred, like Alfred AL, and then
Last name.
Atkey is ATKEY.
It's a Spring Creek Cemetery in Mississauga.
Okay, and there's a little stone. It's sad, you know. And I just wonder, you know, like, you know, we talk now. You hear a lot about PTSD and all that, and you know, it's you know, it must have been awful for him, you know, like if that's true that he was, you know, became an alcoholic and died homeless, like what a tragic story, you know, for this guy who really should be a hero. They should have a statue of him. But again, it's you can't blame people. It's just simply ignorance, you know, it's just not knowing about this. But he may have been sort of brushed aside a little bit because of that unpleasant life he had after.
On that note, I'm going to, Garfield, I can't thank you enough for speaking to us today. It's absolutely fascinating topic. Thank you very much for sharing everything with us. It's a great, it's a totally new perspective on a topic. And I salute you for the research you've done there. And on behalf of our group, I can't thank you enough for speaking to us today.